A poor single father is leading his young son home after an exhausting day of work, their stomachs aching with hunger. Suddenly they spot an elderly woman lying unconscious on the steps of a shop, her lips turning purple, her body trembling in the snow. Without a moment's hesitation they rush to her side, give her their coat, and take her home to care for her. But when the woman's wealthy son arrives, instead of gratitude he pulls out his wallet with a look of contempt, shattering their faith in human kindness. And what happens next will change their entire lives in ways they could never have imagined. Before we dive into the full story, tell me where you're watching from and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss more stories of kindness every day. The bus rattled along Interstate 89, its headlights cutting through the thickening snow. Evelyn Harper sat in the fourth row from the back, her hands folded over a worn leather purse in her lap. She was 78 years old, and this was the longest trip she'd taken alone in over a decade. Through the frost-edged window, she watched the landscape blur into white. New Hampshire had disappeared hours ago. Now they were somewhere in the mountains, and the snow was falling harder than the driver had expected. Evelyn pressed her forehead against the cold glass. She thought about the house she'd left behind in Concord, the wooden house with the sagging porch where she'd lived for 42 years. George's rocking chair was still in the living room, positioned just where he'd left it before the heart attack took him. The mailbox in the hallway still held postcards he'd sent her from his business trips, edges yellowed but words still clear. On the kitchen wall there were pencil marks tracking Brandon's height, year by year, until he'd grown too tall to measure and too busy to visit. She hadn't told Brandon she was coming. She'd tried calling 3 times over the past month, but each conversation had been the same. "Mom, I'm in a meeting. Mom, can I call you back? Mom, let me get through this quarter and we'll figure something out." She didn't blame him. Brandon had worked hard to build his career. He was a senior manager now, something important in logistics. She didn't fully understand what he did, but she knew it mattered. He had a wife, 2 children, a house with a 2-car garage. He'd made it. But she missed him. She missed him the way you miss sunlight after too many gray days. So she'd packed her old suitcase, withdrawn $200 from the bank, and bought a bus ticket to St. Paul, Minnesota. She would surprise him. She would see her grandchildren. She would sit at his kitchen table and feel, just for a moment, like she still belonged to someone. The bus lurched suddenly, and the driver's voice crackled over the intercom. "Folks, we've got a situation. Highways closed ahead due to the storm. We're going to have to reroute." Murmurs rippled through the passengers. Evelyn clutched her purse tighter. The bus turned off the interstate onto smaller roads. The snow was coming down in sheets now, and the wipers struggled to keep up. Evelyn's chest felt tight. She reached into her coat pocket for her phone. The battery icon showed 8%. An hour later the bus pulled into a small town and stopped abruptly. The driver stood and turned to face them, his face grim. "All right, everybody off. Town's called Ashbury. Storm's too bad to keep going tonight. You'll need to find somewhere to stay." "What about our tickets?" Someone called out. "Company'll sort it out. Right now I need everyone off the bus." Evelyn gathered her things slowly. Her fingers felt stiff, and her legs ached from sitting. She followed the other passengers down the narrow aisle and stepped out into the freezing night. The cold hit her like a slap. She gasped, and the air burned her throat. Snow stung her face and clung to her thin coat. Around her, people hurried toward the few lit buildings on the main street, their figures disappearing into the white haze. Evelyn stood on the sidewalk, suitcase in hand, and looked around. Ashbury was barely a town, just a strip of old storefronts, most of them dark. A neon sign flickered in the distance. A few streetlights cast weak yellow circles on the snow-covered pavement. She started walking toward what looked like a motel. Her feet slipped on the ice, and she had to stop every few steps to catch her breath. By the time she reached the motel, her chest was heaving and her face was numb. The sign on the door said "No vacancy." She tried 2 more places. Both were full or closed. The snow was soaking through her coat now, and she couldn't feel her fingers. She pulled out her phone. 5% battery. She tried calling Brandon, but the call wouldn't go through. Evelyn's vision swam. She felt dizzy, unsteady. She looked around for somewhere to sit, somewhere out of the wind, and saw a closed storefront with a small concrete step. She made her way over and sank down onto it. The cold from the concrete seeped through her clothes immediately. She coughed, and the cough turned into a harsh rattling sound that scared her. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't obey. Her head felt light, disconnected. She thought about Brandon. She thought about the house in Concord. She thought about the pencil marks on the kitchen wall. If I fall here, she whispered to no one, will he even know? She tried to stand again. The world tilted. Her vision went dark at the edges, then black entirely. She collapsed into the snow. The street was empty. The wind howled. Snow accumulated on her still form, covering her coat, her hair, her face. The neon sign in the distance continued to flicker, indifferent. Minutes passed. The temperature dropped further. Evelyn's breathing grew shallow, barely visible in the freezing air, and then through the curtain of falling snow, two figures appeared at the far end of the street. A man and a boy, walking home. The man carried a paper bag from the hardware store. The boy stayed close to his father's side, head down against the wind. They were just passing by, just trying to get home before the storm got worse. But the man's eyes caught something, a dark shape where there shouldn't be one. He slowed his steps. Stay close, he told his son, and moved toward what he'd seen. Malik Johnson dropped to his knees beside the woman lying in the snow. His heart hammered in his chest as he pressed two fingers to her neck, searching for a pulse. There it was, faint, but steady. She was alive. Barely. Dad. His son Eli was beside him, 10 years old and shivering despite his winter coat. She's alive. Malik pulled off his own coat and draped it over her. Eli, come here, stand close to block the wind. Eli obeyed without question. The boy was used to his father's quick decisions, the way he moved through emergencies with calm efficiency. Malik looked around. The street was empty. No cars, no people. The hospital was 15 miles away, and in this storm, it might as well have been on the moon. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his wallet. 3 20s and a 10. That was it. That was all the money he had until next week, when if he was lucky, the foreman would call him back for another day of work. He looked at the woman again. Her lips were turning blue. Her breathing was so shallow he could barely see her chest rise and fall. If he left her here to find help, she'd be dead before he got back. He made the decision. Eli, help me get her up. Together they lifted the woman to her feet. She was light, frighteningly so. Malik half carried, half dragged her to the corner where a taxi was idling outside the gas station. He knocked on the window. The driver rolled it down an inch. Yeah, I need to get her somewhere warm. Fast. The driver looked at the woman, then at Malik. His eyes held the calculation Malik had seen 1,000 times before, the weighing, the judgment, the decision about whether to help or drive away. That's gonna be $20. Cash. Malik handed him the money without hesitation. Take us to Maple Street, the rentals. The driver hesitated, then nodded. Get in. They bundled the woman into the back seat. Eli climbed in after her, and Malik followed. He held the woman's head steady as the taxi jerked forward into the storm. Her skin was so cold it barely felt human. He rubbed her hands, trying to bring warmth back into them. Is she gonna be okay? Eli asked quietly. She will be, Malik said. He wasn't sure if he believed it, but he needed his son to. The taxi pulled up to the row of rental houses 10 minutes later. Malik handed the driver the rest of his money, $30, and helped the woman out of the car. His last $70, gone. Just like that. The money he'd been saving for groceries, for the bus fare to the next town where there might be work, for the electric bill that was already 2 weeks overdue, but he'd made his choice, and he didn't regret it. His house was the third from the end. The porch light was out, and the door stuck in its frame from the cold. He shouldered it open and carried the woman inside. The house was barely warmer than the outside. The heater was broken again, and the space heater in the living room could only do so much. Malik laid the woman on the couch and started pulling blankets from the bedroom. Eli, get some water heating on the stove. Okay. Malik wrapped the woman in every blanket they had. Her skin was still ice cold. He rubbed her hands, her arms, trying to bring warmth back into them. After a few minutes, she stirred. Her eyelids fluttered. It's okay, Malik said gently. You're safe. You're inside. The woman's eyes opened. They were gray, clouded with confusion. She looked around the dim room, at Malik, at Eli standing in the kitchen doorway with a pot in his hands. Where? Her voice was barely a whisper. You're in Ashbury, you collapsed in the snow, I brought you here. She tried to sit up, but Malik put a hand on her shoulder. Don't, you need to rest. She coughed, a harsh sound that shook her whole body. I'm sorry, I don't want to be a burden. You're not, Malik said, just breathe, we'll figure it out. Eli brought over a mug of hot water. Malik helped the woman sit up enough to take small sips. Color was slowly returning to her face, though her hands still trembled around the mug. What's your name? Malik asked. Evelyn, she said. Evelyn Harper. I'm Malik, this is my son Eli. Evelyn looked at Eli, and something in her expression softened. The boy's eyes were wide with concern, his thin face serious beyond his years. You're very brave, she told him. Eli ducked his head, shy. Malik stood and went to the kitchen. He opened the cupboard and stared at what was left. Half a loaf of bread, a can of soup, some pasta, a jar of sauce that was almost empty. He'd been planning to make it stretch until Friday, but now there were 3 of them. He made the soup, he toasted the bread, he divided it carefully, giving Evelyn the largest portion and Eli the second largest. For himself, he took barely enough to call it a meal. When he brought it to her, she looked at the bowl, then at him. Her eyes filled with tears. You don't have to eat, Malik said simply. They ate in silence. Evelyn noticed everything. The way Malik watched Eli, making sure his son ate slowly, making sure there was enough. The threadbare couch beneath her, the crack in the window patched with tape, the way the single space heater sputtered and hummed, struggling against the cold that seeped through every gap in the walls. The bills stacked on the small table, their envelopes already opened, their contents clearly bad news. She realized, with a sinking feeling, that she had stumbled into a home that was already stretched too thin, a home that was barely holding together, and her presence here, her need, had just made everything worse. When they finished, Eli stood and disappeared into his room. He returned a moment later with a blanket folded in his arms. It was thin, printed with faded stars and moons, worn soft from years of use. Evelyn could see the places where it had been carefully mended, the stitches small and precise. This wasn't just a blanket. This was something cherished. He brought it to Evelyn without a word. This is yours, Evelyn protested, her voice cracking. I can't take this. You need it more, Eli said quietly. His voice was matter of fact, without any sense of martyrdom or self-pity. He simply saw a need and filled it, the way his father had taught him. Malik didn't stop him. He just nodded at his son, and Evelyn saw in that single gesture a world of love and pride and sadness all mixed together. Evelyn pulled the blanket around herself and felt something break inside her chest. Not pain, but something worse. Gratitude mixed with shame. Here was a child who had nothing, giving away one of the few things that brought him comfort. Here was a man who'd spent his last dollar, his last food, his last resources on a stranger he'd never see again. These people had nothing, and they'd given her everything. The house settled into an uneasy quiet. Outside, the wind howled and threw snow against the windows with increasing violence. Inside, the space heater clicked and hummed, fighting a losing battle against the cold that crept through every crack and crevice. Evelyn lay on the couch, wrapped in Eli's star blanket, and 3 others Malik had piled on top of her. The warmth was returning to her body, but slowly, like water seeping into dry ground. Malik sat in a wooden chair across from her, his hands clasped between his knees. He'd said little since dinner, his face thoughtful but closed off, the expression of someone used to keeping his struggles private. Eli had gone to his room to do homework, but Evelyn could hear him coughing softly through the thin walls. It was a wet, persistent cough that made her chest tighten with worry. Your son, Evelyn said, her voice still hoarse from the cold. He's sick, it's just a cold, Malik said, but there was a tightness in his voice. He gets them every winter, doctor said it's nothing serious. Evelyn heard the way he said doctor, like it was a luxury he'd barely afforded. She looked around the room again, really looked this time, seeing details she'd missed before. The wallpaper was peeling in the corners, revealing water-stained drywall beneath. The floorboards were warped near the door where rain or snow had leaked in repeatedly. There was a patch of cardboard taped over a hole in the wall, painted over in an attempt to match the faded beige, but not quite succeeding. On the small table by the window sat a stack of bills, their corners curling, some of them stamped with red letters she couldn't quite make out from here, but could guess at. Past due, final notice, disconnect warning. The house wasn't just poor, it was on the edge of collapse, both structurally and financially. "How long have you lived here?" she asked. 2 years. "It's cheap. Landlord doesn't fix much, but he doesn't ask questions either." Malik's voice was neutral, accepting. This was simply the reality of his life. Evelyn nodded slowly. She understood. This was the kind of place people came to when they had no other options, when every door had closed, and this was the only one left standing, even if it hung crooked on its hinges. "I'm sorry," she said suddenly, the words bursting out. "I'm so sorry for the trouble." Malik looked at her, his dark eyes steady and impossibly kind. "You didn't cause trouble, you needed help, but the money, the taxi, the food, you spent everything you had. It's done," Malik said. His voice was firm but not unkind. "Don't worry about it." "How can I not worry? You have nothing left because of me. You and Eli will go hungry because we've gone hungry before." He said it simply, without drama or self-pity. "We'll figure it out, we always do." Evelyn felt tears prick her eyes. She blinked them away, but they came anyway, hot and shameful. "Can I ask you something?" "Sure. Why did you help me? You don't know me. You clearly have your own struggles. Most people would have walked past." Malik was quiet for a long moment. He looked at his hands, then at the doorway where Eli's room was, then back at Evelyn. "My wife died 6 years ago," he said finally. His voice was steady, but Evelyn could hear the old grief underneath, worn smooth but still sharp. "Complications during childbirth. Our second child didn't make it either. A little girl, we'd already picked out her name." Evelyn's breath caught in her throat. "After that, it was just me and Eli. He was 4 years old, didn't understand why his mama wasn't coming home." Malik's jaw tightened. "I had to work, but I couldn't afford childcare. Lost my steady job because I kept missing shifts to take care of him when he was sick. Couldn't find another one that would be flexible. One thing led to another, and we ended up here." "I'm so sorry," Evelyn whispered. "I've been on the other side of it, you know. Needing help and not getting it. Asking for work and getting doors slammed in my face. Standing in line at the food bank and seeing people look at me like I was less than human because I needed help feeding my son." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice was quiet but intense. "So when I see someone who needs help, I don't think about it too much. I don't calculate whether I can afford it. I just do what I can. Because I know what it's like to be invisible. To need someone to see you, and have everyone look away instead. Even when you can't afford to," Evelyn said softly. Malik shrugged, "Especially then, because that's when it matters most." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of his words settling between them. Outside, the wind rattled the windows. The space heater sputtered, went quiet for a heart-stopping moment, then clicked back on. "Tell me about your son," Evelyn said, wanting to give him something, even if it was just the chance to talk about the person he loved most. Malik's face softened, the hard lines smoothing into something tender. "Eli's a good kid. Better than I deserve, smart as hell, sorry, smart as anything. He's in 5th grade, gets straight A's even though we move around a lot, and he's changed schools 3 times. Loves reading, especially science books, checks them out from the library, and reads them cover to cover, then goes back for more. He smiled, just a little, wants to be an engineer when he grows up, keeps drawing these elaborate designs for bridges and buildings. Uses whatever paper he can find, homework assignments, I've already checked, the backs of junk mail, napkins from fast food places. He sounds wonderful," Evelyn said. He's patient when I can't buy him the things other kids have. He never complains when dinner is just beans and rice for the 3rd night in a row. He helps out without being asked. And he still believes," Malik's voice caught, "he still believes things will get better. That one day we'll have a real home, with heat that works and walls that don't leak. He draws pictures of it sometimes. A little house with a yard, a tree we could put a swing in, a room that's really his, with bookshelves for all the books he wants to read. Evelyn felt her heart breaking. He's lucky to have you. I hope so. I'm doing my best, but Malik rubbed his face, and Evelyn saw how tired he was, the kind of tired that goes bone deep and never really goes away. Some days I don't know if my best is enough. Some days I look at him, and I think about all the things I can't give him, and I wonder if he'd be better off with someone else, someone who could provide for him properly. Don't say that, Evelyn said sharply. Don't ever say that. That boy doesn't need money or things. He needs you. He needs to know he's loved, and he does. I can see it in the way he looks at you. That child knows he's loved. Malik nodded slowly, accepting the words like a gift, like something he needed to hear but never let himself believe. Eli appeared in the doorway, then wearing oversized pajamas that had been patched at the knees and elbows. They'd clearly been handed down multiple times before they'd reached him. Dad, I finished my homework. Good, come here a second. Eli padded over in worn socks, and Malik pulled him into a gentle hug. The boy leaned into his father, and Evelyn saw the absolute trust in that gesture, the complete security of a child who knows he's safe. You should get to bed, Malik said. School tomorrow, even with the snow. Even with the snow, they don't close schools around here, unless the power goes out. Eli looked at Evelyn. His eyes were serious, too old for his face. Are you feeling better? Much better, she said. Thank you for the blanket. You can keep it as long as you need, Eli said. Then hesitantly, where were you going, before you got stuck here? I was going to see my son, Evelyn said. He lives in Minnesota. Does he know you're coming? No, I wanted to surprise him. Eli nodded, processing this with the gravity of a much older person. I bet he'll be really happy to see you. I would be, if my mom could come back. I mean, I'd want to see her all the time. The simple honesty of it hit Evelyn like a physical blow. She managed to smile. I hope so, sweetheart. Malik sent Eli to bed, and the boy went without protest, though Evelyn could hear him coughing again once he closed his door. Each cough made Malik's shoulders tense, made his hands curl into fists. He noticed her watching. He'll be fine, he said, but there was a tightness in his voice that suggested he wasn't entirely sure. The doctor gave him medicine last time, it just takes a while to work. When was the last time he saw a doctor? Last month. I took a day's pay, I couldn't afford to lose, and we went to the clinic. Malik stood and went to the kitchen, busied himself washing the dishes in the small rust-stained sink. They said it was bronchitis, gave him an inhaler and some antibiotics, said to bring him back if it got worse. And has it? Malik's hands stilled in the soapy water. Maybe, I don't know. I keep telling myself it's just the cold weather, that it'll get better when spring comes. But spring was months away, and they both knew it. Evelyn watched him, this man who carried so much weight on his shoulders, who kept moving forward, even when the path ahead was impossibly dark. She thought about Brandon, about the distance between them that had grown so gradually she hadn't noticed until it was a canyon. She thought about the phone calls that never lasted more than 5 minutes, the promises to visit that never materialized, the way she'd started to feel like an obligation rather than a mother. My son is very busy, she said, speaking to Malik's back. The words came slowly, painfully, like pulling out splinters embedded deep. He has an important job, a family of his own, a big house in a good neighborhood. He's worked very hard for everything he has. Made something of himself. I'm proud of him. Malik didn't turn around, but she knew he was listening. After my husband George died, Brandon started calling more. Just to check in, he said. Just to make sure I was okay. For a while those calls were the best part of my week. We'd talk for an hour sometimes. He'd tell me about his work, his kids, what they were learning in school. I'd tell him about the garden, about the neighbors, about what was on TV. She paused, remembering. But gradually, the calls got shorter. He'd say, Mom, I'll come visit soon, but soon never came. Then it was, let me get through this work thing first. Then it was, maybe next quarter. Then it was, just we'll see. Malik turned around, drying his hands on a threadbare towel that had more holes than fabric. I stopped asking, Evelyn continued. Her voice was getting thick now, tears threatening. I didn't want to be a burden, didn't want to be the nagging mother who couldn't understand that her son had his own life. So I just waited. I waited for him to call, waited for him to remember, waited for the day when he'd have time for me again. You're not a burden for wanting to see your son, Malik said quietly. But I feel like one, Evelyn said, and now the tears came, hot and shameful. Every time I call, I can hear it in his voice. He's busy, he's stressed, he's got meetings, deadlines, things that actually matter. And here's his old mother, calling to chat about nothing important, taking up time he doesn't have. She wiped her eyes with shaking hands, so I stopped calling as much. I stopped asking when he'd visit. I stopped mentioning how quiet the house gets, how long the days are. I just waited, but the waiting got so lonely, so unbearably lonely. Is that why you got on the bus? Yes. The word came out as barely more than a whisper. I thought if I showed up, if he could see me standing there in front of him, maybe it would be different. Maybe we could sit together, just for a little while, and I could remember what it felt like to matter to someone. To be more than a voice on the phone he's trying to get off with as quickly as possible. Malik came back and sat down. His eyes were sad but understanding. My boy needs me, he said quietly. Every single day, he needs me. And some days that's the only thing that keeps me going. When work dries up, and the landlord's banging on the door, and the cupboards are empty, and I don't know how we're going to make it through another week, I look at Eli, and I think, I have to figure this out. He's counting on me. I'm all he has, and somehow I always do. I figure it out. I find a way. You're a good father, Evelyn said. I'm a tired father, Malik said with a small sad smile. I'm a father who's making it up as he goes and hoping I don't screw him up too badly. But I love him. God, I love that boy more than I've ever loved anything. That counts for something. It counts for everything, Evelyn said. They fell silent again. The space heater sputtered, went quiet for several long seconds, then clicked back on. Evelyn pulled the star blanket tighter around herself, feeling the places where Eli's small hands had carefully mended the tears. Can I tell you something? She asked. Of course. I used to think that if I was just patient enough, if I just waited long enough, and didn't complain, and didn't make demands, things would go back to how they were. When Brandon was little, we were so close. He'd come home from school and tell me everything, who he played with at recess, what the teacher said, what he learned that day. We'd bake cookies together on Sunday afternoons. He'd fall asleep on the couch with his head on my shoulder, and I'd just sit there, not moving, because I didn't want that moment to end. She smiled at the memory, even as fresh tears fell. I thought when he had kids of his own, he'd understand. He'd remember what it was like to be a child who needed his mother, and he'd bring his children to visit, and we'd be a family again. But he didn't. He got busier, the distance got bigger, the visits got shorter, and then stopped altogether. And I realized that I was the only one still waiting for something that was never going to come. That's hard, Malik said. The simple acknowledgement, without platitudes or false comfort, meant more than any elaborate sympathy could have. The hardest part, Evelyn said, her voice breaking, is that I don't think he's trying to hurt me. I don't think he wakes up and decides to ignore his mother. I think he just forgot that I'm still here, forgot that time doesn't stop for me the way it seems to for him, forgot that every day that passes is a day I'm getting older, getting closer to the end, and he's missing it. He's missing all of it. She looked at Malik, her eyes red and desperate. Do you ever worry that Eli will forget you, that one day he'll grow up and move away, and you'll just be a voice on the phone he doesn't have time for? Every single day, Malik admitted. The confession seemed to cost him something. I worry that one day he'll grow up and look back, and only remember the things we didn't have. The cold house where the heat never worked, the empty cupboards, the times we had to skip meals, the fact that I couldn't give him a normal childhood, like the other kids had. I worry he'll remember being poor more than he'll remember being loved. He won't, Evelyn said with fierce certainty. Because you're here, You're present. Every single day you're showing him what matters. You're giving him the one thing that's more valuable than anything money can buy. What's that? Your time, your attention, your complete, undivided love. She paused, and her voice dropped to something almost fierce. My son sends me money for my birthday. He sends gift cards at Christmas. But what I want, what I've always wanted, is just a phone call that lasts longer than 5 minutes. I want him to ask how I'm doing, and actually wait for the answer instead of half listening while he checks his email. I want him to remember that I'm still his mother, not just a name on his to-do list that he needs to cross off. Malik nodded slowly. I don't know your son, but I hope he realizes what he has before it's too late. Before the waiting ends in a way nobody wants. So do I, Evelyn whispered. God, so do I. The wind rattled the windows harder now, and somewhere outside, something crashed, a garbage can or a loose shutter. The space heater hummed its uncertain song. Evelyn closed her eyes, exhaustion finally overwhelming everything else. As she drifted toward sleep, she heard Malik moving quietly around the room, checking the door, turning off the one lamp that worked, adding another thin blanket over her. Despite the fact that he had none left for himself, she heard him pause beside the couch. Rest well, Mrs. Harper, he said softly. And for the first time in months, maybe years, surrounded by strangers in a falling-down house in a town whose name she'd never heard before today, Evelyn felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. She felt seen. She felt valued. She felt like she mattered. Not because of who she'd been or what she could provide, but simply because she was a human being who'd needed help, and someone had cared enough to give it. Morning came gray and cold, the kind of morning that never really gets light. Evelyn woke to the sound of movement in the kitchen, and the smell of something cooking, though cooking was perhaps too generous a word for heating water and toasting bread. She sat up slowly, her body stiff and aching in ways that had nothing to do with age and everything to do with exposure and exhaustion. Malik was at the stove stirring oatmeal in a battered pot. Eli sat at the small table writing carefully in a notebook, his tongue caught between his teeth in concentration. He was doing his homework in the dim morning light because they couldn't afford to waste electricity keeping the lamp on all day. Good morning, Malik said when he noticed her. How are you feeling? Better, Evelyn said. It was mostly true. Her chest still ached with every breath, and her throat felt raw, but the bone-deep cold that had nearly killed her was gone. I made oatmeal. It's not much, but it's warm. They ate together, the three of them crowded around the small table that wobbled unless you wedged a folded napkin under one leg. Evelyn noticed that Malik gave her and Eli most of the food, taking only a small portion for himself, barely 3 spoonfuls. When she tried to give some back, he shook his head firmly. I already ate, he lied, and they both knew it was a lie, but what could she say? I need to call my son, Evelyn said after breakfast. Let him know where I am. Phone's in the living room. Help yourself. Evelyn's hands shook as she dialed Brandon's number. It rang 4 times, then went to voicemail. The sound of his voice, "You've reached Brandon Harper, leave a message," made her chest tighten. Brandon, it's Mom. There was a storm. The bus got rerouted to a town called Ashbury, West Virginia. I'm okay, but I'm stuck here. I need you to call me back, please, as soon as you can. She left Malik's address, stumbling over the street name, and hung up. She tried twice more throughout the morning. No answer. By afternoon she was checking her phone every few minutes, willing it to ring. By evening, when Brandon still hadn't called back, she felt something worse than anxiety. She felt that old familiar invisibility settling over her like a shroud. The next morning brought bitter cold and no word from Brandon. Malik went out early, looking for work, leaving Eli to get ready for school. Evelyn helped the boy make a sandwich for lunch from the last of the bread and a thin scraping of peanut butter. Is your dad going to be okay? She asked. Eli shrugged with the practiced nonchalance of a child who'd learned not to worry about things he couldn't control. He always figures something out. That's what he says. But his eyes were worried. Malik came back at noon, his face tight. Nothing today, maybe tomorrow. That night, Evelyn gave them the $47 she had left. Please, take it. For food. No ma'am, Malik said firmly. You need that to get home. I need you and Eli to eat. We'll manage. They went to bed hungry. The knock came at dawn the next morning. Not a polite knock, a pounding that rattled the door in its frame and echoed through the small house like a threat. Malik was in the kitchen, standing by the stove where the pot from last night still sat unwashed because there'd been nothing to wash out of it. Eli was in his room, getting dressed in clothes that had been washed so many times they were more holes than fabric. Evelyn was on the couch, her phone fully charged now but still silent. Malik opened the door. The landlord stood there. Carl Drucker was a thick man in a heavy coat, his face weathered and hard, his eyes the kind of cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. He looked at Malik the way you'd look at something stuck to your shoe. "Johnson, Mr. Drucker, you know why I'm here." "I know, I'm working on it." "Working on it?" Drucker's lip curled. "You've been working on it for 3 weeks. That's $900 you owe me, Johnson." $900 I don't have because you can't pay your bills." Malik's jaw tightened but his voice stayed level. "I said I'm working on it. The foreman told me he'd have work next week. Next week doesn't pay this week's rent. Next week doesn't pay last week's rent, or the week before that." Drucker leaned against the doorframe, his bulk blocking most of the weak morning light. His eyes scanned the dim interior of the house, taking inventory like a vulture circling carrion. They landed on Evelyn, and his expression darkened. "Who the hell is that?" "A guest. A guest." Drucker laughed but there was no humor in it. "You're 3 weeks behind on rent and you're taking in guests. What is this, a bed and breakfast? You running some kind of charity operation here, Johnson?" She needed help. "I need help. I need $900 that I'm owed." "You think I'm running a charity? You think I can just let people live in my properties for free because they've got some sob story?" He jabbed a thick finger toward Evelyn. "She paying rent, she's not staying because if she's staying here she owes me money too. That's how it works. This is my property, Johnson. Mine. Not yours. You don't get to decide who stays here for free." Malik's hands curled into fists at his sides but his voice remained controlled. "She's leaving soon. She just needed a place to stay while I don't care." Drucker straightened, and the movement was somehow menacing despite its simplicity. "You know what? I'm done being patient. I've been more than fair with you, Johnson. I've given you extensions. I've listened to your excuses, and what do I get? Nothing, not a single dollar. Just more promises about next week, next month, when things get better. I will get you the money. You've got 3 days. Drucker's voice dropped to something cold and final. 3 days to get me every cent you owe. Not 4 days, not a week, not when the foreman calls. 3 days. You understand me? Yes, because on day 4 I'm coming back with a locksmith. I'm changing every lock on this dump, and I'm putting every piece of trash you own on that curb. Your clothes, your furniture, that kid's toys, all of it, on the curb." He leaned in closer, his breath visible in the cold air. "And if you're still inside when I get here, I'm calling the cops and having you removed for trespassing. That clear enough for you?" "Yes. 3 days, Johnson. Not 3 days and an hour, not 3 days and let's talk about it. 3 days or you're homeless. Think about that. Think about where your boy's gonna sleep when you're out on the street in the middle of winter." He turned to go, then looked back one more time. "And get that guest out of here before I decide she owes me back rent too." He walked away, his boots leaving deep prints in the snow. Malik stood there with his hand on the door for a long moment before slowly pushing it closed. His hand was trembling. His breathing was carefully controlled, like he was fighting to keep something down, rage or despair or both. "Dad." Eli was standing in the hallway, his eyes enormous in his thin face. He'd heard everything. "It's okay, buddy." Malik's voice was steady, but Evelyn could hear the effort it took. "Go finish getting ready for school." "But he said." "I know what he said. Go on now. We're gonna lose the house." Eli's voice cracked. "We don't have the money. We're gonna be on the street again." "We're not gonna be on the street." How are we not gonna be on the street? You don't have any money. You spent it all." He stopped, his eyes cutting to Evelyn, and she saw the moment he connected the dots. The money his father had spent on the taxi, on keeping her warm, on feeding her. Money they didn't have, money they needed, money that might have kept them off the street. "Eli," Malik said gently, "this isn't her fault. I didn't say it was." But his eyes were wet, and his voice was small and broken. I don't want to go back to the shelter, Dad. I don't want to sleep on those cots where people cough all night. I don't want to move schools again. I finally have friends here. He couldn't finish. He just stood there 10 years old and trying not to cry. Malik crossed the room and pulled his son into a fierce hug. We'll figure it out. I promise. Have I ever let you down? No. Then trust me now. Go to school. Let me handle this. Eli nodded against his father's chest, then pulled away and went to get his backpack. He didn't look at Evelyn as he left, but she felt the weight of his disappointment like a physical thing. When the door closed behind him, Malik stood there, his back to Evelyn, his shoulders rigid. I'm so sorry, Evelyn whispered. The words felt pathetically inadequate. It's not your fault, Malik said to the door. It is. The money you spent on me, if you had that money right now, would have been gone anyway. He finally turned, and his face was calm but his eyes were exhausted. That money was all I had left. I was going to use it to buy food for the week and take the bus to the next town to look for work. But even if I'd done that, it wouldn't have been enough for rent. I'd still be short. I'd still be here, having this same conversation. But now you have nothing. I'll figure it out. He said it like a mantra, like something he'd repeated so many times it had become automatic. I always do. Evelyn felt something twist inside her chest. She reached for her purse with shaking hands, pulled out her wallet, counted the bills. $47. That was all she had left in the world until she could get to a bank. She held it out to Malik with both hands, like an offering. Take this, please. It's not enough, but it's something. It's no. His voice was firm. Malik, please. I said no. He didn't raise his voice, but there was steel underneath. You need that money to get home, Mrs. Harper. I need to help you. You saved my life. You and Eli, you gave me everything when you had nothing. And now you're going to lose your home because of me, and I. Her voice broke. I can't bear it. Please let me help. Please. And what happens to you if you give me that money? Malik's voice was gentle but unyielding. You're stuck here with no way to get home. No way to buy food, or get a bus ticket, or I'll manage. I'll figure something out. Just like you always do. No. He gently pushed her hands back toward her chest. Keep your money, Mrs. Harper. I mean it. You're going to need it. Evelyn wanted to argue, wanted to force the money into his hands, wanted to do something, anything, to fix what her presence had broken. But she could see in his face that arguing would be useless. His pride wouldn't allow it. His dignity, the last thing he had left, wouldn't let him take money from an old woman who had nothing herself. She put the money back in her wallet, feeling helpless and ashamed and angry at her own uselessness. She tried calling Brandon again. 6 times throughout the day. His voicemail box was full. That night, she barely slept. She kept thinking about Eli's face, about the 3 days counting down, about the winter cold and the shelter where a 10-year-old boy didn't want to go back. She kept thinking about Malik lying awake in his room, trying to figure out how to perform a miracle with empty hands. The next day, Brandon finally called back. Brandon Harper had been in back-to-back meetings for 3 days straight. A distribution crisis in the Midwest. A supplier going bankrupt in Texas. 100 small fires that needed putting out, each one urgent, each one critical. He'd barely slept. He'd eaten lunch at his desk for 5 days running. His wife was annoyed. His kids barely saw him. When his assistant knocked on the conference room door looking worried, he'd been in the middle of a presentation about optimizing warehouse logistics. He'd held up one finger, wait, and continued talking about efficiency metrics and cost reduction. It wasn't until the meeting ended 2 hours later that he finally listened to his voicemails. 7 missed calls from an unknown number, 3 voicemails from his mother, each one more strained than the last. Brandon, it's Mom. There was a storm. The bus got rerouted. He stopped walking in the middle of the hallway. Other employees had to step around him, throwing him curious glances. By the time he finished listening to all 3 messages, his face was white. His mother, stuck in some town he'd never heard of, staying with strangers. She could have died. She could have frozen to death, and he'd been too busy to even notice she was traveling. Too busy to wonder why she hadn't called in over a week. He called the number back immediately. A man answered, his voice wary. "This is Brandon Harper, my mother Evelyn Harper. Is she there?" "Yes. She's safe, she's okay." "What happened?" "The man Malik," he said. His name was explained briefly. "The storm. The bus stop, his mother collapsing in the snow, being brought to his home." Brandon's mind raced with questions, with concerns, with a growing horror at how close he'd come to losing her. But what came out of his mouth was, "I'll be there in 6 hours. Tell her I'm coming." He didn't wait for a response. He hung up, grabbed his coat from his office, and was in his car within 10 minutes. 6 hours of driving through snow and slush and his own mounting dread. 6 hours to think about the fact that his mother had been taking a bus, alone, to come see him because he'd been too busy to visit her. 6 hours to imagine her lying in the snow, dying, calling his name. By the time he reached Ashbury, his hands were white-knuckled on the steering wheel, and his jaw ached from clenching. Brandon's car, a new Lexus SUV with heated seats and a premium sound system, pulled up to Maple Street just after 6 in the evening. The contrast between his vehicle and the neighborhood was jarring. Everything here looked like it was held together with duct tape and desperation. The houses were crumbling. Half of them looked abandoned. There were broken-down cars in driveways, some of them stripped for parts. Trash bins overflowed. Windows were boarded up or covered with plastic sheeting. A dog barked frantically from behind a chain-link fence, the sound sharp and aggressive. This wasn't poverty. This was destitution. Brandon found the address and parked, locking his car twice, then checking the doors again. He got out, his expensive shoes crunching in the snow, his wool coat insulated against the cold. The house looked like it might collapse in a strong wind. The porch sagged, paint peeled from the walls in long strips. One of the windows was cracked and taped over with plastic. The door hung slightly crooked in its frame. He knocked, his stomach tight. A black man opened the door, mid-40s, wearing a flannel shirt that had been washed so many times the pattern had faded to almost nothing. Jeans with patches on the knees, work boots that had seen better years. His hands were calloused, his eyes tired, his face weathered beyond his years. Brandon looked at him, really looked at him, and his first instinct wasn't gratitude, it was wariness, suspicion, the automatic, unconscious calculation. Poor neighborhood, black man, his mother staying here. The prejudices he would have sworn he didn't have rose up like bile. "I'm Brandon Harper," he said, his voice clipped. Professional. The voice he used with subordinates. "Where's my mother?" "Inside. She's okay." Brandon didn't wait for an invitation. He pushed past Malik, stepping into the dim interior of the house, his eyes scanning for threats, for signs of deception, for anything that would confirm his worst suspicions. He saw Evelyn on the couch, wrapped in blankets that had clearly seen better decades, looking small and fragile in a way that made his heart clench. "Mom." He crossed the room in 3 long strides, and dropped to his knees beside her, his hands on her shoulders. "Are you okay? Are you hurt? Did someone hurt you?" No, I'm fine." Evelyn's voice was weak but steady. Her eyes were red, like she'd been crying. "Brandon, this man helped me. He saved my life. He and his son." Brandon looked back at Malik, who stood by the door with a young boy beside him. The boy was thin, wearing clothes that didn't fit right, staring at Brandon with wide, wary eyes. Something in Brandon's expression shifted, not to gratitude, to something harder. "Calculation." "Right," he said, standing up. He pulled out his wallet, the leather worn soft from years of use, from being full of credit cards and cash, and the weight of success. "Okay, let's settle up. How much?" Malik blinked. "Excuse me, how much do I owe you?" Brandon's voice was brisk, businesslike, the tone of someone negotiating a transaction. "For taking care of my mother, the taxi, the food, the lodging, whatever else. What's the total? Let's just handle this now, and be done with it." The air in the room changed, went cold in a way that had nothing to do with the broken heater. "I don't want your money," Malik said quietly. His voice was controlled, but there was something underneath it, something hurt and insulted and angry. Brandon let out a short laugh. It was dismissive, condescending, the laugh of someone who knew better. "Come on, don't be like that. Everyone wants something, right? You brought her here, you fed her, you gave her a place to stay. That's worth something. That's a service, so let's just be adults about this, and name your price. Brandon, Evelyn said, her voice sharp with warning. Stop it, Mom, I'm handling this. He didn't even look at her, his eyes were fixed on Malik, and his expression was the one he wore in negotiations. Patient, slightly amused, knowing he had all the power. Look, I get it, you did a good thing. You helped someone who needed help. That's great, that's wonderful, but let's be realistic here. You clearly need the money. His eyes swept the room, the peeling wallpaper, the patched walls, the ancient furniture. So let's just make this easy for everyone. $500, $1,000, I can write you a check right now. Just tell me what it costs, and we're done. Eli took a step closer to his father, pressing against his side. Malik put a hand on his shoulder, and Brandon saw the gesture, protective, defensive, and read it as aggression. I didn't help your mother for money, Malik said. His voice was still quiet, but there was steel underneath now, anger carefully controlled. I helped her because she needed help, because she was dying in the snow, and I couldn't walk past that. Sure, I get that. Brandon's tone was patronizing now, the voice of an adult explaining simple concepts to a child. You're a good Samaritan, that's very noble, but come on, let's not pretend here. You must want something. Nobody does this kind of thing for free, especially not. He stopped himself, but too late. The implication hung in the air like smoke, especially not people like you, especially not poor people, especially not black men in falling down houses in bad neighborhoods. The words he hadn't said echoed louder than if he'd shouted them. Malik's jaw tightened, his hand on Eli's shoulder tightened. You need to leave, not without my mother, then take her, but you need to leave. Now. Brandon stepped closer, using his height, his expensive clothes, his entire bearing as a weapon. Do you have any idea who I am? What I do? I manage distribution for one of the largest logistics companies in the Midwest. I have connections, resources. I could help you out. I could make your life easier. I could. He gestured around the room with barely concealed disgust. Get you out of this place. But you need to be reasonable about this. Reasonable. Malik's voice was flat, emotionless in a way that was somehow more frightening than if he'd been shouting. You think I'm being unreasonable, because I won't let you pay me off like some kind of... He stopped, shook his head. Get out of my house. I'm offering you money, real money, enough to fix this dump you're living in. Enough to, I said get out. Brandon stepped back, startled, not by the volume. Malik hadn't actually raised his voice that much, but by the fury underneath it, the barely contained rage of a man who'd been insulted in his own home, whose dignity had been trampled, whose kindness had been reduced to a transaction. Dad helped her because she would have died. Eli's voice cracked on the word, tears streaming down his thin face. He used his last money, all of it. We don't have food now, we don't have rent, we're gonna lose our house, and he still helped her because that's what you're supposed to do when someone needs help. You don't, he was sobbing now, the words coming in gasps. You don't get to come in here and act like we're bad people because we're poor. You don't get to treat my dad like he's Eli. Malik's voice was gentle but firm. He pulled his son against his side, and the boy buried his face in his father's shirt. That's enough. But Eli had said what needed saying. The truth hung in the air between them, ugly and undeniable. Malik looked at Brandon, and there was something in his eyes that made Brandon take another step back. Not fear, not anger, something worse, disgust, profound, bone-deep disgust. Take your mother, Malik said quietly, and get out of my house. Brandon opened his mouth to argue, to explain, to make Malik understand that he was trying to help, that he was being generous, that this man was being irrational and ungrateful, but then he looked at his mother. Evelyn was staring at him with an expression he'd never seen before. Her face was white, her eyes were red, and in them was something that made his words die in his throat. Disappointment. Deep, profound, soul-crushing disappointment. Brandon, she whispered, and her voice was broken. What have you become? The question hit him like a physical blow. Mom, let's just go. We'll talk in the car. He helped her to her feet, wrapped her coat around her shoulders with hands that weren't quite steady. Evelyn looked at Malik, at Eli still crying against his father's side, and her face crumpled. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking completely. "I'm so sorry, for all of it, for being here, for costing you everything, for what she couldn't finish." She just stood there, crying, this old woman who'd almost died, and who'd been saved by people who had nothing, only to have her son treat them like servants to be paid off and dismissed. "It's not your fault," Malik said. He wouldn't look at Brandon. "Couldn't, you didn't do anything wrong." Brandon guided his mother to the door. She was moving slowly, like every step hurt. As they reached the threshold, he turned back one more time, unable to just leave it like this, unable to accept that he was the villain here. "Look, if you change your mind about the money," Malik closed the door in his face. The sound of it, solid, final, echoed in the cold evening air. Brandon stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, feeling something he hadn't felt in years: shame. The car ride was silent for the first 20 minutes. Brandon drove with his hands tight on the steering wheel, his mind racing. He kept replaying the scene, the way Malik had looked at him, the way that kid had cried, the way his own mother had stared at him like he was a stranger. He'd been trying to help, he'd been trying to make things right, he'd been offering money, real money, that could have solved their problems, and they'd thrown it back in his face like it was an insult. "That was ridiculous," he finally said, breaking the silence. His voice was defensive, self-justifying. "Who turns down help like that? I was trying to do the right thing." "Help?" Evelyn's voice was small but sharp. "Is that what you think you were offering?" "Yes, I was trying to compensate him for what he did. That's how the world works, Mom. People provide services, other people pay for those services. I was just trying to buy your way out of feeling anything." Evelyn turned to look at him, and her eyes were still red, but now they were blazing too, angry in a way he'd never seen her angry before. "You didn't see him, Brandon. You didn't see them. You didn't see the man who carried me through a blizzard, when he had every reason to walk past. You didn't see the little boy who gave me his most precious possession because I was cold. You just saw poor people who must want money. That's all you saw. That's not fair, isn't it?" Her voice rose, filled with a fury that seemed impossible from such a frail body. "Did you even look at them? Really look? Did you see the way that little boy looked at his father? Did you see the dignity in that man's face when you kept insisting on paying him? Did you see anything except your own discomfort?" Brandon's face flushed hot. "I was trying to help." "No, you were trying to make it clean, easy, simple. Write a check, solve the problem, walk away without having to actually feel anything or acknowledge what they did for me." She was breathing hard now, her chest heaving. "That man gave me his coat when he was freezing. He spent his last dollar, Brandon, the money he needed to feed his son, to get me to safety. His child went without so I could eat. They shared everything they had when they had nothing. And you tried to reduce all of that kindness and sacrifice and basic human decency, to a transaction, to a number you could write on a check and forget about. You're being dramatic, am I?" Her voice cracked. "Did you see his face when you kept insisting? When you kept pushing money at him like he was some kind of beggar? Did you see his son crying? That little boy who's about to lose his home partly because his father helped me, and you couldn't even give them the respect of acknowledging that without trying to pay it off. I was trying to. They don't want your money, Brandon." She was shouting now, this woman who never raised her voice, this mother who'd spent decades being quiet and patient and they wanted your respect, they wanted to be seen as human beings who did something good, but you couldn't even give them that. You stood in their home, where they welcomed a stranger and saved her life, and you treated them like they were beneath you. That's exactly what you did. You stood there in your expensive coat with your expensive car keys in your hand, and you looked at them like they were. She couldn't finish. She turned away, staring out the window, her thin shoulders shaking. Brandon drove in silence. His hands were trembling on the steering wheel. His face burned. Somewhere deep in his chest, in a place he didn't want to acknowledge, he knew she was right, but admitting that would mean admitting something worse about himself, something he didn't want to see, so he drove faster, as if speed could carry him away from the truth. They drove in silence the rest of the way to St. Paul, 4 hours of highway and snow and the weight of things unsaid pressing down until Brandon could barely breathe. When they finally pulled into his driveway, the wide concrete driveway of his 4-bedroom house in the good neighborhood with the good schools, his wife Sarah came rushing out. "Thank God you're okay." She pulled Evelyn into a hug, and Evelyn clung to her daughter-in-law like a lifeline. "We were so worried. What happened?" "I'll tell you later," Brandon said curtly. His voice was tight, controlled. "Let's just get Mom inside." That night, lying in the guest bed in Brandon's house, the guest room with the comfortable mattress and the thick comforter and the radiator that actually worked, Evelyn couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about Malik's face when Brandon tried to give him money. The quiet dignity that refused to be bought, the hurt underneath that dignity, the wound of being reduced to a price tag. She kept thinking about Eli's tears, about the star blanket, about the way Malik had stood between his son and the world, protecting him even from kindness that felt like insult. She thought about her own son, and how somewhere along the way, in all his success, in all his climbing and achieving and accumulating, he'd forgotten the things that actually mattered. She thought about the fact that she'd raised him better than this. She'd taught him about kindness and compassion, and seeing people as people, not as problems to be solved or services to be paid for. And she wondered, lying there in the dark, if there was any way to make him remember, if there was any way to wake him up before it was too late. 2 days after they returned to St. Paul, Evelyn collapsed in the bathroom. Sarah found her unconscious on the tile floor, her skin gray, her breathing shallow and ragged. The ambulance came within minutes, but it felt like hours. At the hospital, Brandon paced the waiting room like a caged animal, back and forth, his expensive shoes squeaking on the linoleum. Sarah sat with her hands folded, praying silently. The minutes stretched into hours. When the doctor finally came out, his face told Brandon everything before he spoke a word. "Mr. Harper, your mother has severe congestive heart failure. It's been progressing for quite some time, likely years, but it's been asymptomatic until recently. The exposure she experienced during the storm, the stress, the cold, it accelerated the deterioration significantly." Brandon felt the floor tilt beneath him. The walls seemed to close in. "What does that mean? You can fix it, right? Surgery or medication or..." "I'm afraid her heart is too weak for surgery. We can manage her symptoms, keep her comfortable." But the doctor paused, his eyes kind but unflinching. "I'd estimate 6 months. Possibly less." The words didn't make sense. They were in English, but Brandon couldn't process them. 6 months, that can't. She's not that sick. She's just tired. She just needs rest, and I'm very sorry. I wish I had better news. We'll do everything we can to make sure she's comfortable and that her remaining time is as good as possible." Remaining time. The phrase echoed in Brandon's head like a death knell. He sat down hard in a plastic chair. Sarah sat beside him, took his hand, but he didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything except a vast yawning emptiness opening up inside him. 6 months. His mother had 6 months left. 6 months before she was gone forever. 6 months before he could never call her again, never visit her again, never have the chance to what? To be the son he should have been. To make up for years of being too busy. To show her that she mattered. 6 months wasn't enough. A lifetime wouldn't be enough. That evening he sat by his mother's hospital bed. She was awake but tired, an oxygen tube in her nose, monitors beeping softly around her, painting lines of her failing heart on screens he couldn't bear to look at. "Hey Mom." "Hi sweetheart." Her voice was weak but warm. Even now, even after everything, she was glad to see him. "The doctor talked to me. He didn't know how to say it, didn't know how to speak the words that would make it real. He said." "I know what he said." Evelyn's voice was calm, accepting. "I've known something was wrong for a while now. The shortness of breath, the fatigue, the way my heart races when I climb stairs. I didn't want to make a fuss. You should have told me." His voice broke on the last word. "Would you have listened?" The question was gentle, but it cut deeper than any accusation could have. Brandon opened his mouth to say yes, of course he would have listened, he would have dropped everything, he would have, but they both knew it was a lie. He would have told her to see her doctor, he would have said he'd call her back to discuss it. He would have meant to follow up and then gotten busy and forgotten until weeks later when he remembered with a flash of guilt that quickly faded back into the demands of his day. He wouldn't have listened. Not really, not in the way that mattered. I'm sorry, he whispered. God, Mom, I'm so sorry. Evelyn reached for his hand. Her grip was weak, her fingers cold and thin. Brandon, I need you to do something for me. Anything, whatever you need. Do you want a different doctor? A specialist? I can find the best. I need you to go back to Ashbury. Her voice was firm despite its weakness. I need you to find Malik and Eli. Mom, please. She squeezed his hand with what little strength she had. I need to see them again. I need to apologize. Really apologize. Not just for what you did, though God knows that needs apologizing for, but for what I cost them, for being there at all, for using up their resources when they had nothing. For you didn't do anything wrong. I brought trouble into their lives, my presence cost them money they couldn't afford, and then you made it so much worse by treating them like they were. She stopped, gathering strength. They deserved better from us. They deserve better still, and I need to make it right before She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. Brandon wanted to argue, wanted to say she was being unreasonable, that she should focus on getting better, that those people didn't matter, that she should be thinking about herself right now. But he looked at his mother's face and saw something he recognized but hadn't seen in years. Determination, purpose, the fierce resolve of someone who knows their time is limited and refuses to waste what's left on anything that doesn't matter. Okay, he said quietly. Okay, when you're strong enough, we'll go. Promise me. I promise, Mom. I'll take you back. We'll find them. She smiled, a small sad smile that broke his heart. Thank you. She closed her eyes, exhausted from even that brief conversation. Brandon sat there holding her hand, watching her breathe, counting each breath like they were precious coins he might lose if he looked away. 6 months. The clock was ticking. 3 weeks later, when Evelyn was stable enough to travel, Brandon drove her back to Ashbury. Sarah had wanted to come, had offered to sit with her mother-in-law, to help, but Evelyn had been firm. This is between us and them, she'd said. We're the ones who need to make it right. The drive was long and uncomfortable. Brandon's mind kept wandering back to that day, to the way Malik had looked at him, the way Eli had cried, the way he'd felt standing there with his wallet out and his assumptions naked on his face. He'd tried to forget it, tried to tell himself it didn't matter, that he'd been trying to help, and that wasn't his fault if they were too proud to accept it. But his mother's words kept echoing in his head. You treated them like they were beneath you. And the worst part, the part that kept him awake at night, was that she was right. When they pulled onto Maple Street, Brandon's stomach twisted into knots. The neighborhood looked even worse in the harsh light of a winter afternoon. Every flaw was visible, every sign of poverty and neglect on display. But this time, instead of feeling superiority or wariness, he felt shame. These were people's homes. People lived here, raised families here, did their best with what they had. And he'd looked at all of it with contempt. They drove slowly down the street, looking for the house, and Brandon felt his dread growing with each passing second. When they finally found the address, his heart sank. The house was empty, not just empty, abandoned. The windows were dark, the door hung open, showing a bare interior. There was trash on the porch, discarded mail, a broken lamp, things that had been left behind or thrown out. No, Evelyn whispered. No, no, no. Brandon parked and got out, helped his mother from the car. An older woman came out of the house next door, a black woman in a purple house dress, her gray hair wrapped in a scarf. She looked at them with suspicious eyes. You looking for the Johnsons? She called. Yes, Brandon said, his throat tight. Do you know where they went? Landlord kicked them out last week, said they couldn't pay rent, put all their stuff on the curb. She shook her head, her expression sad and angry. That boy cried the whole time they were packing. It was shameful, just shameful. Where did they go? Evelyn asked, her voice desperate. The woman's expression softened a little when she looked at Evelyn, seeing an old woman, seeing genuine distress. They're at the shelter over on Hancock Street. That's where most folks end up, when Drucker kicks them out. Been happening a lot lately. He's trying to sell the properties, so he's clearing people out left and right. Thank you, Brandon managed. His voice sounded hollow. They got back in the car. Evelyn was silent, staring straight ahead, her lips pressed together in a thin line. Brandon could see tears on her cheeks, but she didn't make a sound. They drove to the shelter. It was a converted church, the kind of building that had probably been beautiful once but now looked tired and worn. Peeling white paint, bars on the windows, a sign out front that said Hancock Street Emergency Shelter, all are welcome. Inside, the smell hit them first. Unwashed bodies and industrial cleaner, and the particular smell of desperation, that mix of sweat and fear and resignation that clings to places where people go when they have nowhere else. The main room was full of people, families sitting at folding tables, children doing homework on the floor, old men slumped in plastic chairs, staring at nothing. The sound was a low hum of conversation, crying babies, coughing, the shuffle of feet on linoleum. They found Malik and Eli in the common area, sitting at a corner table away from the main crowd. Malik was helping Eli with homework, bent over a math worksheet, his voice patient as he explained something. Eli's face was serious, concentrating, but he looked thin, thinner than he'd been 3 weeks ago. His clothes were the same ones he'd worn before, still too big, still held together with patches. When Malik saw them approaching, his entire body went rigid. He put a protective hand on Eli's shoulder, his expression closing off like a door slamming shut. "We don't want any trouble," he said. His voice was flat, warning. "We're not here to cause trouble," Evelyn said, stepping forward. Her voice was shaking, but she kept going. "Please, can we talk, just for a few minutes?" Malik looked at her for a long moment, then at Brandon, then back at her. Something in his face softened, not much, but enough. 5 minutes, that's it. They sat down at the table. Eli watched them warily, his body pressed close to his father's side, protective, scared. "I came to apologize," Evelyn said. Her voice was thin but clear, every word an effort, "not just for what happened when my son came to get me. For all of it, for being there at all, for costing you money you couldn't afford to lose, for bringing this," she gestured around at the shelter, tears streaming down her face now, "for bringing this into your lives. You didn't do anything wrong," Malik said. His voice was gentle, but his eyes were tired, so tired. "But I did. I let my son treat you like you were less than human. I should have stopped him sooner. I should have made him see." Her voice broke completely. "You saved my life. You and Eli gave me everything when you had nothing. And because of that, because of me, you lost your home. You're here, in this place, and I." She couldn't finish, she just sat there crying. This old woman who was dying, who'd come back to apologize for the damage her presence had caused. "Mrs. Harper." Malik's voice was firm now, cutting through her tears. "I don't blame you. I made the choice to help you. I made the choice to spend that money. I knew what it would cost, and I did it anyway. That's not on you." "But it is," she insisted. "If I hadn't been there, if you hadn't helped me, you'd still have your home." "Maybe," Malik said, "or maybe we'd have lost it anyway a month later. We were barely hanging on before you showed up. The money I spent on you was just the final straw, not the cause." He paused. "And I don't regret it. Even now sitting here, I don't regret helping you." "How can you say that?" Brandon's voice cracked. He'd been silent until now, but the words burst out of him. "You lost everything. You're in a shelter. Your son is." He looked at Eli, saw the boy's hollow cheeks, his thin arms, the exhaustion in eyes that were too young to look that old. "How can you not regret it?" Malik turned to look at Brandon fully for the first time. His eyes were steady, unflinching. "Because some things matter more than having a roof over your head. Your mother was dying in the snow. If I'd walked past, if I'd decided my problems were more important than her life, I could have kept my house. But I would have lost something more important." He touched Eli's shoulder. "I would have taught my son that you only help people when it's convenient, that you only show kindness when you can afford it, that some lives matter more than others based on what it costs you to save them. But you're suffering because of it," Brandon said, his voice desperate, pleading. "You're here because you helped her. I'm here because the system is broken," Malik said quietly, "because rent is too high, and wages are too low, and one unexpected expense can destroy you. I'm here because the landlord values profit more than human beings. I'm here because we live in a world that punishes kindness and rewards selfishness. He leaned forward. But I'm not here because I helped your mother. I'm here because helping your mother revealed how close to the edge we already were, and that's not her fault. That's the fault of a society that lets people like us barely survive while people like you. He stopped himself, but the implication was clear. Brandon felt the words like a slap. He wanted to defend himself, wanted to explain that he'd worked hard for what he had, that he'd earned it, that it wasn't his fault, but the excuses died in his throat. I was wrong, he said finally. The words came out hoarse, painful. What I did, how I acted, it was wrong. I treated you like you were something to be managed, a problem to be solved with money. I tried to reduce what you did to a transaction, because that's easier than actually feeling grateful, easier than acknowledging that you're a better person than I am. Malik didn't respond. Brandon looked around the shelter again, at the cots visible through a doorway, lined up in rows like in a military barracks, at the worn linoleum floor, at Eli's backpack propped against the table leg, still held together with duct tape. Let me help you, he said. His voice was raw with something he couldn't quite name. Guilt, shame, a desperate need to fix what he'd broken. Really help you, not because I owe you, though I do, not to make myself feel better, though it might, but because you deserve better than this, because what you did, what you both did, it deserves to be honored, not punished. I'm not a charity case, Malik said, his voice sharp. I'm not offering charity, I'm offering. Brandon struggled to find the words. I'm offering partnership. Help me help you. Let me find you a real place to live. Let me connect you with better work. Let me. Why? Malik's voice cut through Brandon's words like a knife. Why do you suddenly care? 3 weeks ago you couldn't leave fast enough. You couldn't wait to write me a check and forget we existed. So why now? Brandon opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth was complicated. The truth was uncomfortable. The truth made him look at himself in ways he'd been avoiding for years. Because my mother is dying, he said finally, the words breaking something open inside him. The doctors say she has 6 months, maybe less, and she's going to die, knowing that the last thing I did for her was insult the people who saved her life. She's going to die disappointed in me, ashamed of me, and I can't. His voice broke completely. He put his head in his hands, shoulders shaking. Sarah had asked him not to break down, to be strong, but he couldn't hold it together anymore. I can't live with that, he whispered through his hands. I can't let that be her last memory of me. I can't let her die, knowing that I'm the kind of person who looks at someone like you and sees a price tag instead of a human being. The silence stretched out, heavy, suffocating. Then Eli spoke, his small voice cutting through the quiet. Mrs. Harper is dying, because of the snow, because she fell. Evelyn nodded, tears streaming down her face. Partly, sweetheart, but mostly because I'm just old and my heart is worn out. Sometimes things wear out, and there's no fixing them. Tears filled Eli's eyes. He looked at his father, then back at Evelyn. That's not fair. You didn't do anything wrong. You were just trying to see your son. Life isn't always fair, Evelyn said gently. But that's okay. I got to know you and your father. I got to see real kindness. I got to understand what actually matters. So even though I'm sick, even though I'm running out of time, I'm grateful for that. Malik's jaw worked. His eyes were wet now too, though he was fighting it. He looked at Brandon, then at Evelyn, then at his son who was trying so hard not to cry. What kind of help are you offering? He asked finally. His voice was cautious, but there was something underneath it. Hope carefully guarded. Brandon laid it out, speaking slowly, trying to make it clear that this wasn't charity or pity or an attempt to buy forgiveness. A real apartment, not a falling down rental from a slumlord. Help finding steady work with a construction company he knew was hiring. Regular hours, benefits, room to advance. Support for Eli, proper winter clothes, school supplies, a doctor visit for that persistent cough that Malik couldn't afford to properly address. And maybe, if Malik was willing, help getting his name out there, connecting him with people who could give him opportunities instead of day labor that disappeared every winter. Not handouts, Brandon said. Connections, opportunities, a chance to build something stable. I can't accept charity, Malik said again, but his voice was weaker now, less certain. then pay it forward. Evelyn said, her voice gaining strength. When you're stable, when you're on your feet, when you have something to give, help someone else. That's all I ask. Don't let what happened to you stop you from being the kind of person who helps. Don't let the world make you bitter. Just pass it on. Malik looked at her for a long time. Really looked at her, this old white woman who was dying, who'd come all the way back here just to apologize, who was asking him to accept help not for her sake, but for his son's. That's really all you want, he asked, for me to help someone else, when I can. That's all, Evelyn said. I want to know that something good came from all of this, that you and Eli are okay, that my son learned something, that the kindness you showed me didn't end up costing you everything with nothing to show for it. Malik's eyes were wet now, tears running down his face that he didn't bother to wipe away. He nodded once, sharp and quick, unable to speak. Okay, he finally managed. Okay. Brandon felt something break open in his chest, relief and grief and gratitude all mixed together. I'll get started tomorrow. I'll make some calls, set things up. It might take a few weeks, but we've got time, Malik said, then softer, thank you. They sat there for a few more minutes, not saying much, just being together in that loud, desperate place. Before they left, Eli got up and gave Evelyn a careful hug, mindful of how fragile she seemed. I hope you feel better, he whispered. I won't, sweetheart, Evelyn said gently. Honestly. But knowing you're going to be okay, that helps more than medicine ever could. It took 3 months to get everything in place. Brandon used every connection he had, called in every favor, pushed harder than he'd ever pushed for anything in his professional life. He found Malik a job with a construction company that was expanding, steady work, benefits, room for advancement if he proved himself. He helped them find a small 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. Not fancy but clean and safe, with heat that worked and windows that didn't leak. He made sure Eli saw a doctor, a real doctor, not a clinic, and got the medication he needed for his persistent bronchitis. He made sure the boy had warm clothes that fit, school supplies that weren't falling apart, books from his list of things he wanted to read. He did it all quietly, without fanfare, checking in regularly but never making Malik feel like he owed anything beyond what they'd agreed, to pay it forward when he could. And slowly, carefully, Brandon started to change. He volunteered at the shelter one Saturday, then another. He started really looking at the people there, not past them, not through them, but at them. Seeing their faces, hearing their stories, understanding that every person there had a life as complex and valuable as his own. Evelyn watched from Brandon's house in St. Paul, getting weaker by the week, but smiling more than she had in years. She saw her son becoming someone she recognized, someone she was proud of, and it gave her a kind of peace she hadn't known she needed. But they all knew time was running out. 6 months after the diagnosis, Evelyn slipped away in her sleep. Brandon was there, holding her hand. So was Sarah. So were the grandchildren, who'd been called in from school because Grandma was having a bad day and might not have many more. She went peacefully, surrounded by family, in a warm house with people who loved her. It was as good as death could be. At the funeral, Brandon stood at the podium and looked out at the gathered crowd, family, friends, neighbors, co-workers. And in the third row, Malik and Eli, both wearing suits that Brandon had quietly helped them acquire. Eli had the star blanket with him, folded carefully on his lap. My mother taught me something important at the end of her life, Brandon said. His voice was steady, though his hands shook where they gripped the podium. She taught me that love isn't about grand gestures or money or success. It's not about what you can buy or what you can achieve. It's about being present. It's about seeing people, really seeing them, and honoring their dignity, even when it costs you something. He had to stop, had to breathe. I spent years being too busy for my mother, too busy working, too busy building a career, too busy creating a life that looked successful from the outside, and all that time, the person I was supposedly building it for, the woman who'd raised me, who'd loved me unconditionally, who would have dropped everything if I'd needed her, was slowly disappearing, while I looked the other way. His voice cracked, but he kept going. She's gone now. I can't get that time back. I can't undo the years of being absent while being technically present. I can't take back the phone calls I cut short, or the visits I postponed, or the moments I missed, because I was too focused on things that didn't actually matter. He looked directly at Malik, who sat very still, his arm around his son. But she gave me a gift at the end. She introduced me to people who showed me what I'd forgotten, who showed me that kindness isn't transactional, that dignity can't be bought, that sometimes the poorest people have the richest hearts, and the most successful people are actually the most bankrupt. He had to stop again, pressing his fingers against his eyes to hold back tears. My mother is gone. But I can honor her by living differently going forward, by being present instead of productive, by seeing people instead of managing them, by showing up when it's needed instead of when it's convenient, by recognizing kindness when it's right in front of me, even if it doesn't look the way I expected it to. After the service, people came up to offer condolences, to share memories, to hug him, and Sarah and the kids. Eventually, the crowd thinned. Malik approached slowly, Eli beside him. They stood there in the cold sunshine, snow crunching under their feet, breath visible in the frozen air. She was a good woman, Malik said simply. She was, Brandon agreed. His throat was tight. And you made her last months better. You gave her something to hold on to, something good to remember. So thank you for all of it. You don't have to thank me, I know, but I'm going to anyway. Brandon looked at Eli, who was holding the star blanket against his chest. You taking good care of that? Yeah, Eli said. It's important. It is, Brandon agreed. It reminds us what matters. They stood there for a moment, these three people connected by circumstances they never could have predicted. Then, impulsively, Brandon pulled Malik into a brief, fierce hug. You changed my life, Brandon said quietly, his voice rough with emotion. You and Eli, you showed me what I'd been missing, what I'd become. And I'm not going to forget that, ever. Take care of yourself, Brandon, Malik said. And your family, that's what she'd want. I will. You too. They parted then, Malik and Eli walking toward the bus stop because they still didn't have a car, though Brandon was working on that. Brandon watched them go, the man who'd saved his mother, the boy who'd given his most precious possession to a stranger, and felt something settle in his chest. Not peace exactly, but purpose. A year later, Brandon stood in a small office downtown. The sign on the door read Evelyn's Light Foundation. The foundation helped elderly people who were isolated, forgotten, slipping through cracks in a society that valued productivity over presence. It connected them with resources, with community, with people who remembered that everyone deserves to be seen. It also helped single parents barely holding on, families one emergency away from disaster, people who just needed a hand up instead of falling all the way down. Malik worked there now, part-time, coordinating outreach programs. He kept his construction job, the benefits were too good to give up, and the steady income meant stability for Eli. But he volunteered 20 hours a week helping others navigate the systems that had once defeated him. Eli, now 11 and healthier than he'd been in years, volunteered after school. He'd organize donations, help file paperwork, sit with elderly visitors and just listen to their stories. On the wall of the main office hung a photograph of Evelyn, her official portrait, taken years ago when she'd still smiled easily, and next to it, in a simple frame, was Eli's star blanket. Brandon touched it sometimes when he was alone in the office late at night, working on grant applications or planning new programs. The fabric was still thin, still patched in places, still worn soft from years of use, but it had saved a life once, and now it reminded him every single day what actually mattered. Not the size of your house or the balance in your account, not your title, or your achievements, or the things you could afford to buy, but the moments you chose to show up, the times you saw someone and decided they mattered, the love you gave before time ran out. He picked up his phone and called his daughter. Hey sweetie, I know you've got homework tonight, but I was wondering if you wanted to have dinner together. Just us. No phones, no TV, no distractions, just time together. What do you say? There was a pause on the other end. He could hear her surprise. Really, Dad? You're not too busy? I'm never too busy for you. I learned that lesson too late with Grandma. I'm not making that mistake again. I'd love that, Dad. Good, I'll pick you up at 6. He hung up and looked at the star blanket one more time, running his fingers over the careful stitches where a 10-year-old boy had mended the tears with small patient hands. I'm trying, Mom, he whispered to the empty office, to the photograph on the wall, to the memory of a woman who died teaching him how to live. I'm really trying, and somewhere, in whatever comes after, he hoped she knew. He hoped she could see that her last lesson had taken root. That kindness wasn't an invoice to be paid. That love didn't wait for convenient timing. That people mattered more than productivity. That being present was worth more than being perfect. Don't turn kindness into an invoice. Don't wait until time runs out to learn how to be there for the people you love. Love doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be on time.
Join us to share meaningful stories by hitting the like and subscribe buttons. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell to start your day with profound lessons and heartfelt empathy.